Aureon, the Golden One. Aureon, the Golden One. Chapter 1. The Drop. The sky did not rumble, there was no warning, just a sudden stillness in the wind, and then a golden light. It began as a glint above the clouds, no larger than a distant star, but it grew steadily, silently, until the sun itself seemed dim in comparison. In a matter of minutes, eyes across the globe tilted skyward, cameras caught it, phones buzzed, satellites failed, and then they saw it. From the heavens, a vessel descended, pure gold, not polished metal, but light itself cast into form. Its surface shimmered like water, yet held the shape of something ancient and intelligent. It was not built, it was born. Etched into its curvature were flowing lines of geometric glyphs that shifted as it turned, as though the ship were reading the sky. The world called it many things that day: a sign, a weapon, a god, a threat. But the Orari called it the Luminarch. It hovered over a wide plateau in the middle of nowhere, an expanse of red rock and silence somewhere between desert and mountain. No cities, no borders. The perfect place for the world to come together, or fall apart. As the golden ship hovered, a portion of its underside spiraled open like the petals of a metallic lotus. From its center, something began to lower, a circular platform, glowing softly, suspended in gravity like a breath held in time. Upon the platform sat a figure, cross-legged, motionless, radiant. His skin shimmered faintly with gold, not in the way of armor or display, but in the way sunlight glows through closed eyelids. He wore a robe of flowing threads, gold woven yet soft like wind, wrapped in the tradition of monks or saints. Around his neck, a strand of spherical orbs hovered slightly above his chest, like beads, but shifting, alive with energy. He did not look up. He did not move. He simply was. The platform touched nothing, suspended just above the stone. As it stabilized, a wave of pressure rippled outward, not forceful, but gentle, like a bell rung inside the soul, and then the orb formed. It rose from beneath him, a liquid gold sphere, slowly wrapping around the platform in a shimmering flow. It moved like honey and vapor, water and flame, until he was sealed within. The world could no longer see him. Only the orb of light pulsing faintly was visible. Drones buzzed overhead. Military personnel scrambled. News anchors filled the silence with fear. But the orb did not react. They called the president. They alerted the UN fighter jets scrambled. Satellites zoomed. They drew up lists of alien protocols they hadn't looked at since the Cold War. Every eye was on the desert. Every prayer was half-whispered. And still, the orb remained. From high above, the Luminarch began to ascend, not fast, not with noise, but with grace, as if time itself bowed in reverence. In moments, it was gone, swallowed by sky and distance. The being was left behind, alone, seated in silence, wrapped in a sphere of liquid light. 2 hours passed, then 6. The orb did not flicker. The being did not move. But those near the site, pilots, soldiers, cameramen, began to feel something unusual. They couldn't explain it, but time felt slower. Their thoughts, softer. Memories of old regrets surfaced. A few wept. One laughed. One fell to his knees and began to pray, though he had never believed in anything before. Something was changing, not outside them, inside. At the edge of the cordoned zone, a child stood with her mother, holding a handmade sign. "If you're here to help us, thank you." She didn't understand why her stomach felt warm, or why her eyes felt like they were full of sunlight. But she smiled. Far above, analysts speculated, argued, debated. Who was he? What was the purpose? Was this the beginning of invasion or revelation? World leaders scrambled to form committees. One country sent a tank, another a prayer circle. No one could agree on the correct response. But no matter what they planned or said, the Golden One did not move. That night, the stars above the orb burned brighter than usual. No light from the sphere touched the sky, but it seemed the heavens recognized something sacred had arrived. All around the world, in every language, one question echoed. What does he want? But there was no answer. Only silence, and a soft hum in the heart of the earth. Chapter 2. The Orb. By morning, the orb was surrounded. Military vehicles formed a trembling ring around the plateau, their tires sunk halfway into the ancient dirt. Satellite uplinks hummed, drones floated overhead like mechanical insects, and biohazard tents fluttered in the soft breeze. A command tent pulsed with urgent chatter, its screens displaying every angle of the golden sphere from satellites, thermal cameras, and infrared sensors. But none of it could see inside. The orb remained, perfect, untouched, untouchable. Its surface glimmered with a liquid gold sheen, rippling like molten sunlight suspended in time. It was not solid, yet it held form. It wasn't hot, yet nothing could touch it. When a private tossed a pebble at it in curiosity, it never landed. The rock slowed mid-air and gently reversed its path, dropping softly back at his feet. The private didn't speak again for an hour. Aureon sat within, still and silent. He had not moved since the descent. His breathing could not be confirmed, nor his temperature, nor even his mass. Some speculated the orb was a form of stasis. Others believed it was a weapon, a last line of defense. But a few, only a few, felt something else. Even from outside the shield, those who lingered near the orb began to experience a strangeness they couldn't name. A colonel who hadn't slept in 3 days suddenly sat on a rock and wept without warning. A reporter chasing her next headline dropped her phone and stared for 10 minutes in stillness. A veteran with a hidden pistol in his jacket found his hand trembling, not in fear, but in recognition. The orb didn't speak, but it sang, not with sound, but presence. Despite warnings, despite protocol, someone issued the command. A team approached with penetration scanners, high-frequency pulse arrays, military-grade tech built to analyze even black-site bunkers. They walked in slow formation, their boots crunching softly against the red dust. At 50 meters, the readings shorted. At 40 meters, their watches stopped. At 30 meters, their voices failed. One man turned, eyes wide. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. His teammates tried to shout, but nothing passed their throats. Then, as if the air had become thick and slow, time itself warped around them. Their limbs slowed. The desert wind halted mid-gust. A nearby bird froze in flight like a statue of feathers in the sky. The orb pulsed once. A breathless, golden ripple swept outward, gentle, not destructive. And with it, time resumed. The team was found 2 minutes later kneeling, eyes glazed in reverent stillness. When asked what happened, only one could speak. "I saw myself," he whispered. "Not who I am, who I was supposed to be." The footage was classified immediately, but leaks have a way of finding the world. By nightfall, the world was watching, not just with fear, but fascination. Across continents, makeshift vigils formed. In gardens, on rooftops, in churches, in temples, people stared at their screens and fell silent. Something inside them stirred, a memory they didn't know they'd forgotten. Children were the first to speak clearly about it. "He's not here to hurt us," one boy said on a live stream. "He's waiting for us to stop being scared." In a studio thousands of miles away, a news anchor trembled mid-broadcast. He stared at the camera, eyes full of something fragile. I don't know what's happening anymore," he said. "But when I look at that orb, I remember my father. I remember the day he held me and I felt safe. I haven't felt that in 20 years, but I feel it now." The segment was pulled, but millions saw it. Not all welcomed the silence. In hidden rooms, generals barked orders. Religious leaders condemned the golden being as a false prophet. Billionaires scrambled to buy influence in the approaching storm. But the orb did not acknowledge them. To it, fear and control were nothing but noise. And in its presence, noise could not survive. At the edge of the camp, a woman stood alone. She had traveled by foot for 2 days, through scrubland and stone, driven by a dream she didn't understand. Her name was Miriam. She was not special, not famous, not broken. But something inside her was ready. As the guards shouted, she stepped forward. They raised rifles. She kept walking. The orb pulsed once. The rifles disarmed themselves, locks clicking open, clips falling to the dirt like raindrops. No one stopped her again. She walked until she stood within 10 meters of the golden sphere. Then she sat. Not in protest, not in devotion, just in quiet. And the world saw her. By the end of that second day, there were 10 like her. By the third, there were 50. By the fourth, over 100. They came with no demands. They asked no questions. They simply sat. And something in the air began to change. Not far from the perimeter, a scientist monitoring electromagnetic fluctuations noted a pattern. The closer the observers sat to the orb, the calmer the field became. Electrostatic activity, wind pressure, even seismic micro-tremors all began to stabilize. Not just at the site, everywhere. Somehow the orb was anchoring the Earth. Or perhaps it was anchoring us. That night, under starlight unspoiled by city haze, a camera drone caught a frame of something new. For a moment, just a flicker, a silhouette appeared inside the orb. A figure seated cross-legged. His eyes opened, and though no sound was recorded, thousands watching the live stream felt it. You are not alone. Chapter 3. The Silence. By the end of the first week, they came in thousands, not with flags, not with chants, but with sleeping bags, open hands, and a longing they couldn't explain. The field around the orb transformed into a living mandala of silent witnesses. Men, women, children, elders, wanderers, skeptics, seekers. Some came alone, some in small groups, but all arrived quietly, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. There were no stages, no leaders, no sermons, only the sound of wind over stone, and the orb, glowing softly at the center. It had not changed. But they had. Aureon had still not moved. He had not spoken, not visibly breathed, and yet he was changing the world. Those who sat closest to the orb began to report strange dreams. Some saw memories from childhood long forgotten, moments of peace, shame, love, guilt. Others dreamed of future versions of themselves, stronger, softer, wiser. Some awoke weeping, others awoke laughing. The press called it the stillness effect. The faithful called it the reflection. But no name could contain it. No technology worked within 20 meters of the orb. Not watches, not phones, not even heartbeat monitors. But no one near it felt fear. In fact, many said that within its radius, time felt elastic, like hours could pass in minutes, or moments could stretch like moonlight on water. One woman described it like this: "When I sit with him, it's like the weight I've carried my whole life just floats. Not because it's gone, but because I finally understand it's not mine alone." World leaders grew anxious. While some nations sent medical tents and food, others demanded answers. An armed convoy from a northern superpower positioned itself just outside visual range, claiming to monitor potential alien biological threats. But the crowd didn't move. When the convoy attempted to deploy signal jammers, their own equipment backfired, disabling their GPS and corrupting all communication logs. Black box records recovered days later revealed only static, followed by a single phrase spoken in a voice no one recognized. "You are still welcome here, but only in peace." Meanwhile, the crowd around the orb began to form naturally into concentric circles, almost as if mimicking the waves of stillness it released. In the outer circles, people whispered quietly, journaling or meditating. In the mid-ring, most sat in total silence. In the innermost circle, those closest to the orb, some simply wept, held hands, or placed their palms to the earth. No one gave these instructions. They just happened. Among them was a man named Elias, a war veteran who hadn't spoken in 7 years. He arrived on day 9, limping, silent, and hollow-eyed. He didn't go to the center. He sat at the edge of the field. On the second day, he moved closer. On the third, closer still. By the fourth day, he stood at the very front, within 10 meters of the orb. And for the first time in years, he knelt. Not to worship, not to beg, just to be still. He placed both hands to the dirt. Then he whispered, "I forgive you." He did not say who the words were for, but the ones around him felt the earth shiver. From across the world, voices began to shift. Some spoke of miracles, others called it delusion. But something was breaking in the collective silence, a kind of reckoning that had no enemy, no villain. Aurion's stillness was a mirror, and the world was seeing its reflection, and not all of it was beautiful. In certain places, resistance sparked. Cults declared him a false light. Armies held secret meetings. Online, conspiracy theories bloomed like mold in a sealed jar. He's a machine sent to rewrite our DNA. He's here to prepare Earth for harvesting. He's a distraction to unify global control. But the orb made no proclamations, no judgments, no commands. Only presence. At the edge of the gathering, a child named Noor sat with her father. She was 9 years old. She had leukemia. and she had stopped speaking 2 months before Aureon arrived. No one expected anything. They had come only to feel peace. But on the 11th morning, as the sun rose red across the plateau, Noor stood. She walked quietly toward the orb, alone. No one stopped her. The crowd parted. She stepped within 10 meters. She looked up at the golden light. And for the first time since her diagnosis, she spoke. "Thank you for waiting." Then she sat and smiled and never needed morphine again. That day, Aureon opened his eyes, only briefly, only once. But a satellite picked it up, and those near the orb felt it, not like a wind, but like a cord struck across the spine. It was not power, it was not even healing, it was recognition. As if to say, "I see you now," because you see yourselves. The silence deepened, and across the earth, a tension that had held for centuries began to loosen. Chapter 4. The First Teaching. The 11th sunrise painted the plateau in a strange light, soft gold and pale lavender, like the sky itself had lowered its voice to a whisper. The crowd had grown beyond counting. Some sat in silence. Some held hands. Some wept without knowing why. The orb still shimmered, rippling like warm liquid glass. But something in the air had changed, thicker, charged, like the moment before a thunderclap. Birds circled overhead, but never passed directly above. Insects fell silent. Time felt stretched. Then, without a sound, the orb began to melt. It wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a graceful surrender. From its crown, the golden shell began to dissolve, flowing downward like honey folding into itself. Ripples of light curled around Aureon as the liquid pooled in elegant spirals. As it touched the levitating platform, it didn't disappear. It gathered. The golden flow coalesced into a single, living column, forming a gentle leg beneath the platform, just enough to suggest stability, but not contact. The platform still hovered, a breath above the earth, but now anchored in light. And there, at last, Aureon was seen. He sat as he had since the beginning, cross-legged, unmoving, palms resting on his knees. His skin glowed faintly, not metallic, but luminous, like the inside of a candle. His eyes were open now, steady and serene, vast as a moonlit sea. He looked not down, not up, just forward, into the world. Around his neck, the orbolite beads floated gently, each one a perfect sphere of golden glass, some clear, some cloudy. But now one began to glow. It shimmered brighter than the others, and as it did, the wind changed direction. A ripple of sensation passed through the crowd. Some gasped, some exhaled sharply, like they just remembered to breathe. Aureon did not speak, but the teaching had begun. The vision didn't come as light or sound. It came as knowing. Each person experienced it slightly differently, yet somehow the same. The first teaching. The thread of separation. They saw Earth, not as land and sea, but as a web of living connections. People appeared not as bodies, but as orbs of light, some bright, some dim, all connected by glowing threads. These threads pulsed gently between individuals, families, strangers, enemies, lovers, but something strange happened. Some of the threads had grown twisted, others had withered. Many had been cut, and around each damaged thread a dark smoke coiled. Shame, blame, fear. In the vision, Aureon appeared, not as a god, but as a hand of golden light. He did not repair the threads. He did not judge the darkness. He simply held the broken ends in his palm. And when he did, the threads began to remember themselves. Some reconnected, some dissolved peacefully, some turned to gold. The lesson came not in words, but in understanding you are not broken. You are tangled. You were never alone, only wounded. You cannot be whole while denying the thread that binds you to others. Back in the physical world, many in the crowd began to cry softly. Others placed hands on their hearts. Some turned to strangers beside them and held them without speaking. One woman reached for her estranged father, who had come in secret and sat 10 feet away. They hadn't spoken in 11 years. They embraced and said nothing. It was enough. At the perimeter, armed guards lowered their weapons instinctively, not by order, by resonance. And in the tents beyond the field, scientists stared at their monitors, confused. The Earth's magnetic field had briefly stabilized, globally, for 17 seconds. They didn't know what it meant, but it felt good. Aureon remained still, but his gaze was not passive. It was like looking into something that already forgave you, even before you knew what to ask forgiveness for. And in that gaze, another truth unfolded, not through voice, but through vibration. You are not here to be right. You are here to become real. Beneath all your differences is the wound of forgetting, and I have come to help you remember. The golden bead pulsed one final time, then dimmed, and with it, the vision faded. The air returned to normal. The birds sang again, and yet, nothing felt the same. Across the world, strange phenomena were reported. A man in Brazil who hadn't spoken since childhood began reciting poetry in his sleep. A prison yard in Romania fell into stillness as inmates sat in silence for hours. A woman in Tokyo woke from a coma and whispered the word, thread. None of these people had watched the live stream, but somehow, they had heard the teaching. That night at the camp, no one spoke. Even the children sat in silence, wrapped in blankets of starlight and stillness. And Aureon simply sat, eyes open, hands calm, unmoving, not above them, not apart from them, but with them. Chapter 5. The Attempted Strike. It happened just after the 12th sunrise. The air was still, the crowd was quiet, and Aureon sat unmoving, golden, weightless above the earth. His platform shimmered like a suspended thought. The stabilizing column of liquid gold pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat of the world. And then, in the far distance, a sound broke the silence. A sharp roar, fast, mechanical, not thunder, not nature, a jet. The crowd stirred. Some stood. A few turned. From the far horizon, a black streak slashed the sky. A military drone, sleek and angular, flying low and fast. It bore no flag, no insignia, no warning. It wasn't coming to observe. It was coming to strike. Behind it, far out of sight, a clandestine bunker pulsed with frantic data. A private faction, buried deep beneath an independent nation, had declared the orb a threat to sovereignty. It's disrupting electromagnetic systems. It's hypnotizing civilians. It's dangerous. What they didn't say aloud. They were afraid. Afraid of what they couldn't control. Afraid of a world that might choose love over fear. Afraid of silence. As the drone neared, the crowd did not run. Some screamed. But most simply turned toward Aureon. He did not look at the drone. He did not lift a hand. He simply opened his eyes wider, as if welcoming what was to come. And then, time slowed. The drone halted mid-air. Not crashed. Not shot down. Just stopped, like a fly caught in amber. Its propulsion systems spun silently. Its kill switch failed. Even gravity seemed unsure what to do with it. Everything around it, the wind, the birds, the dust, froze. Within the cockpit, cameras recorded something impossible. A golden wave radiated outward from the orb. Not light, not heat, but presence. And within that presence, the drone's memory core began to change. The men watching from the bunker blinked. Their screens went white. Not blank, white, glowing, soft, silent. Words appeared, slowly, gently, etched in golden letters across every monitor. You act not from power, but from pain. You fear not me, but yourselves. Your weapons carry your wounds. I carry none. Then, static. Then, a single image. A child. Inside the drone, something shifted. The pilot's neural feedback loop, though remote, was suddenly filled with emotion. Not from him, to him. A memory surfaced, one he had long buried. His father's hand on his shoulder the day before deployment. The silence between them. The love that was never spoken. He gasped. He ripped off the headset. I saw him. I felt he couldn't finish the sentence. In his heart, something cracked. Back at the plateau, the drone, still motionless, began to glow faintly. Its black metal shimmered gold for an instant. Then, gently, it turned away. Not by force, but like a leaf caught in a current, it drifted, slowly, humbly, into the sky. The machine that had been built to kill now moved with reverence. It flew high, higher, until it vanished into the clouds. Not a weapon, just a messenger that had been heard. The crowd was silent. Many had dropped to their knees. Not out of fear, out of recognition. Aureon did not gloat. He did not rise. He only lowered his eyelids half-closed, as if blessing the moment. Not the people, not even the drone, but the choice. The choice not to strike. The choice not to fear. The choice to return what was sent, with peace. Across the world, something broke open. Footage leaked, first from a satellite, then from someone's phone. The moment the drone halted mid-air went viral within minutes. The caption read simply, "He stopped time with stillness." At the United Nations, a delegate stood and removed his earpiece mid-speech. "Whatever this is," he said, "we must meet it with presence." Not policy. In churches, temples, mosques, clergy wept. Not because a miracle had occurred, but because they knew it wasn't a miracle. It was truth. A truth so deep and so simple it had gone unnoticed for centuries. That stillness, real stillness, disarms everything. That evening, a man approached the edge of the platform. He was old. He carried a walking stick and eyes full of sorrow. He had served in 5 wars. He had trained others to kill. He had ordered strikes like the one that had just failed. He knelt before Aureon, weeping. "I've spent my life building cages," he whispered. "But you built a door." Aureon said nothing. But one of the orbolite beads began to glow, just briefly, and the old man's shoulders softened. No one ever claimed responsibility for the attack. No nation admitted it. No faction took credit. But no one had to. Because the world saw what happened. Not just the weapon, but the response. And something fundamental shifted. "He did not strike back," said one broadcaster. "He didn't even blink." And that's what scared them most. The next morning, another child sat near Orion's platform. She wasn't old enough to speak, but she hummed a soft tune under her breath. A lullaby. One her mother said she had never heard before. Chapter 6. The Child. Her name was Amira. She was 7 years old. She came barefoot, dressed in a faded cotton dress the color of sunlight filtered through leaves. She didn't speak much. She didn't smile often. But ever since the Golden One arrived, her eyes had changed. They no longer darted nervously. They listened. Her parents brought her to the edge of the gathering on the 14th day. They'd come not for answers, but for peace. The kind of peace they hadn't felt since the diagnosis. The doctors had said the seizures would come back, that there was nothing they could do. That time was slipping through their fingers like dry sand. But when they arrived near the orb, Amira reached for her mother's hand, looked up, and simply said, "I need to go see him." At first, her parents hesitated, but something in her voice was different. Not demanding, not fearful, just clear. The crowd parted as she walked forward. No one told her to stop. No guard raised a hand. Even those closest to the platform stepped aside as if they too felt the invisible current pulling her forward. She moved through circles of silence, through layers of stillness, until she stood alone, 10 feet from Aureon. He did not look at her, but he saw her. His eyelids slowly lifted. The orbolite beads stirred faintly, one glowing with a soft golden warmth. The girl tilted her head. "Are you sad?" she asked. The words were simple, small, but in that moment, they carried more weight than all the declarations of kings. Aureon didn't speak, but the air changed. Amira blinked, then saw, not with her eyes, but with her whole being. She saw a planet, not Earth, but one made of light, where rivers flowed through the air and trees hummed when touched. She saw beings like Aureon, not many, just a few, sitting in circles of gold, not in rule, but in reverence. Then she saw him alone, floating above Earth, watching, waiting. For us. She saw the sadness, not the sadness of being feared, but the sadness of watching a world forget how to feel. She looked at him again. Her lips trembled. "Do we make you hurt?" Aureon raised his gaze, not higher, but deeper. The glowing bead pulsed once, and Amira felt something inside her crack open, not in pain, but like a cocoon breaking. The crowd around them held its breath. No cameras rolled. no broadcasts aired. And yet, everyone present would later describe that moment the same way. The world paused to listen to a child. Amira took one small step closer. "I think I remember you," she said softly. "You were in my dream. You were light, but you didn't talk with your mouth." She reached out a hand, not to touch, but to share. Aureon did not move, but the air between them shimmered. A vision unfolded. The second teaching. The Garden of First Light. They saw a garden, not made of plants, but of memories. Each person in the crowd saw their first memory of joy. A boy saw his grandmother's kitchen, smelling of cinnamon and rain. A woman saw the day she learned to ride a bike, her father's laugh behind her. An old soldier saw the moment he first held his son, before the world taught him to be hard. And in the center of all those memories was Amira, walking barefoot through the garden, touching each one gently. Wherever she stepped, the memories became golden flowers, blooming upward into light. Aureon did not speak the lesson. It was the lesson: you do not heal the world by force. You heal it by remembering joy, remembering what you were, before fear taught you to forget. Amira smiled, not a child's smile, a smile of knowing. She turned around, walked back to her parents, and climbed into her father's arms. "He's not lonely anymore," she said. "I found his happy." Then she slept, and her seizures never returned. The gathering changed after that. People no longer came just to witness. They came to remember. They brought photos, letters, sketches. They wrote poems and buried them in the earth near the platform. Children began placing stones in spirals, forming constellations no one had taught them. Somehow, everyone understood what they meant. In the far corners of the world, more strange awakenings occurred. A mute boy in a refugee camp drew a perfect image of Amira and Aureon, having never seen them. An entire kindergarten class in Iceland began painting golden flowers in unison, claiming, "The light man showed us." A woman in prison began sculpting glowing orbs from soap and thread. And every night, as stars poured over the plateau, the people dreamed not of invasion or death, but of a quiet place, filled with golden gardens. Aureon did not move again that week, but no one needed him to, because now they understood. The teachings weren't just in what he said, they were in what we remembered when we listened. Chapter 7. The Vision of Earth. The 17th sunrise came with no fanfare. There was no announcement, no shift in weather, no radiant glow. And yet, something in the air felt inevitable. The way thunder builds in silence. The way truth leans forward before it speaks. Aureon remained seated as always, gold-robed and timeless, but his eyes were open wider now, focused not on the crowd, but on the sky. Above him, clouds slowed, not stopped, slowed, like a deep inhale before a word of great weight. The air tightened, and then one of the orbolite beads lifted, not glowing, but rotating slowly, humming with anticipation. The crowd felt it first, a pulsing pressure behind the eyes, like a thought trying to enter before it had formed. They looked to Aureon. He still did not move. But the bead began to glow, and with it came the vision, It was not projected onto the sky. It wasn't a broadcast or a hologram or a spectacle. It was a feeling that became an image, and the image became a knowing, and the knowing became truth. The vision of Earth. They saw their world, not through satellites or maps, but through the eyes of the Aurari. And it was aching. Not just the forests cut down, or the oceans thick with plastic. Not just the oil fires or the poisoned rivers, but the people, the billions of tiny souls, screaming silently, children watching their parents collapse under invisible stress, women staring at screens, shrinking into themselves, men afraid to cry, laughing too loud to hide the emptiness, old ones forgotten, young ones disoriented, so much doing, so little being. The earth itself shuddered under the weight of it all. They do not know they are sick, the vision whispered, because pain is all they've ever known. The Aurari had watched for centuries. They had hoped the silence would call Earth inward, but the noise only grew, until now. In the vision, they saw cities pulsing like fevered organs, economies spiraling like wild gears with no off switch. Warfare not in bombs, but in thoughts, in division, in algorithmic violence. And then, something deeper. A collective wound, buried so deep beneath the surface that no one even knew it was there. It looked like a shadow at first, but then it pulsed. Alive, reactive, made of all the uncried tears, all the buried screams, all the unmet selves. It was not evil. It was not demonic. It was simply forgotten pain. They are not monsters, the vision whispered. They are remembering too slowly. Then the vision shifted. The Earth's pain didn't disappear, but it was balanced, suddenly, by beauty. Children laughing beneath the sky. Hands held across generations. A midwife singing to a newborn. A stranger carrying groceries for an elder. A field of sunflowers growing from a bomb crater. The Earth was not lost. She was hurting, yes, but also trying. Always trying. The Aurari had seen it, and they had wept for it. Even in darkness, the vision whispered, the human heart finds a way to shine. Back on the plateau, people began to cry, not from guilt, but from recognition. They weren't being punished. They were being seen, and through that seeing, something inside them began to mend. A man stood near the outer ring of the gathering. He was a billionaire. He had arrived by helicopter 3 days earlier, skeptical but curious. He watched the vision with arms folded. At first he sneered, then he winced. Then he sat. Then he wept. He saw a memory, the moment he first lied to someone he loved. Not to gain power, but to avoid feeling small. And how that one moment had hardened into 1,000 more. He saw his own shadow, and for the first time, he did not run from it. Around the world, similar moments bloomed. In a military command center, a general halted an airstrike with a single word: pause. In a crowded courtroom, the judge stopped proceedings and asked the defendant if he was okay. A viral video surfaced of thousands in Times Square suddenly sitting down, cross-legged, silent, holding hands with strangers. No one could explain why. Only that they saw themselves. Back at the platform, the glowing bead dimmed. Aurion's eyes remained open, but softer now. Not in warning, in invitation. There was no spoken message, but the meaning was clear. You have seen what you are. You have seen what you carry. Now decide what you will become. The moment passed. The clouds resumed their rhythm. Birds returned to the sky. But the people stayed silent, not in fear, but in awe. That night, the sky over the plateau shone with auroras that should not have been there. Green, gold, violet waves danced overhead in places where no solar activity had been recorded. Scientists couldn't explain it, but Amira, sitting beside her mother, smiled and whispered, "Earth is listening now." Chapter 8. The Teaching of the Mirror. The vision had faded, but its imprint remained. For 3 days, Aureon did not move. The bead that had glowed lay dim once more, but something had shifted, not in him, but in them. The people no longer came seeking signs. They came to see themselves. They spoke less, sat longer, touched the earth with gentler hands. The crowd was still large, but somehow more present, as if every heartbeat had aligned to a slower, deeper rhythm. The world had paused, and into that stillness, the next teaching arrived. It began with the bead, again. But this time, 2 beads began to glow. Not brightly, but in a pulse. Back and forth, like breathing made visible. The air thickened. Some in the crowd lowered their heads, sensing it. A few placed hands on their chests. A man began to cry without knowing why. Then Aureon opened his eyes wide, wider than ever before, and in the minds of all gathered, an image appeared. The parable of the mirror. A man wandered through a forest of glass. Each tree he passed reflected his face, but he did not see beauty. He saw disgust. He called the trees broken, ugly, evil. He smashed them. The reflections grew sharper, more distorted. He built a helmet to shield his eyes. But still, the glass spoke. It whispered his name in tones of grief. It showed him not what he hated, but what he had hidden. Finally, exhausted, he fell to his knees, and when he looked down at his own hands, he saw that he was the one bleeding, not from the mirrors, but from the anger with which he struck them. And in that moment, the forest changed. He took off his helmet. He sat still, and the glass softened. His reflection grew gentle, not perfect, but true. The image faded, and the understanding came. What you call evil in others, the teaching pulsed, is often the part of yourself you've buried too deeply to love. Judgment is the armor of the wounded. Blame is the mask of the forgotten self. When you meet pain in another, do not raise a sword. Raise a mirror. No voice spoke these words aloud, but they landed in hearts like seeds ready to bloom. In the crowd, a woman named Celeste stood. She was quiet, composed, but inside her lived a war she hadn't known how to end. She had lost her sister 3 years ago in an argument that turned into silence. They had not spoken since. The last thing she had said was, "You're just like Mom." It had been meant as an insult. But now, in the reflection of Aurion's teaching, she saw the truth. Her sister was like their mother, and so was she. But the parts she couldn't stand in her sister were the parts she refused to see in herself. It wasn't hate. It was a mirror. She fell to her knees, clutching a photo she had brought and buried in the dust. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I see me now." Elsewhere in the crowd, others experienced the same. A father saw the cruelty he used to control his son was the same cruelty he received as a child. A woman who'd sworn off love saw that every wall she built was to protect the child inside her, not punish those outside. A teenage boy who had been bullied saw his tormentor in a vision, crying alone in his room, clutching a broken toy and whispering apologies to no one. And across the plateau, as the teaching rippled through the silence, something extraordinary happened. People began turning inward, not just emotionally, but physically. They turned away from Aureon, not out of rejection, but reverence. They formed small circles, groups of 3, 5, 10, facing each other, looking, seeing. Aureon remained still, and yet the lesson spread like golden fire. In the outside world, the effects deepened. News anchors broke down crying on air, not from tragedy, but from sudden self-awareness. A viral video showed two rival gang leaders meeting in silence, hands over their hearts, in front of a mural of a cracked mirror. A trending phrase emerged online. "It was me all along." And strangely, search traffic for "how to forgive someone who hurt you" reached historic highs, but not everyone welcomed the teaching. In government chambers, certain leaders grew restless. One minister slammed his hands on a table and yelled, "We don't need a therapist from space, we need control." A general whispered, "I think he's undoing something in us." Another replied, "No, I think he's revealing what was always there." The tension grew, and so did the fear. That night, back at the plateau, Aureon finally moved. Not much, just a tilt of his head, a subtle gesture. But it was enough. And a third bead began to glow. The next teaching was near, but the mirror would remain, and those who looked into it, truly looked, would never be the same again. Chapter 9. The Spiral of Fear. The mirror had been offered, and many saw themselves, but not all liked what they saw. In the days that followed Aureon's 8th teaching, division returned, not among the silent pilgrims at the plateau, but in the world beyond. Where some had softened, others began to harden. Where some had healed, others felt exposed. In dark rooms and high towers, voices grew louder, desperate to reclaim control of a story that no longer belonged to them. A media mogul declared Aureon a false light on live television. Don't be fooled by silence. Even wolves know how to wait. We're being studied, manipulated. This is not love. It's psychological warfare. He was applauded in certain corners of the world. In others, he was pitied. The mirror had shown him something, and he had rejected it. Religious authorities debated openly. Some denounced Aureon as the Antichrist. Others called him the return of divine wisdom. A schism formed between those who saw him as a reflection of sacred truth and those who feared he was here to replace it. One archbishop spoke gently to his congregation. Perhaps he is not the light. Perhaps he is only the lamp, and we are the ones who must choose whether to ignite it. In political circles, panic bloomed like fungus. Closed-door meetings escalated. He's destabilizing our influence. He's collapsing national identities. What happens if people stop fearing the systems we built? Some began circulating internal memos calling Aureon a Class 1 cognitive threat. They drafted protocols for containment, sedation, isolation. They spoke in the language of threat assessments and contingency. But behind every phrase was a simpler truth. They were afraid. Not of Aureon, but of a world where people no longer needed them to feel whole. On the 21st day, a summit of global leaders convened virtually. The call was brief. There was no consensus. Only fear. One president ended the call with trembling words. What if he's not doing anything to us? What if we're just seeing who we've become? The room fell silent. Meanwhile, at the plateau, the gathering continued to grow, but not in noise, in depth. People still came in silence, sat in silence, and left changed. Aureon had not moved, but his stillness had become a presence, one that exposed everything. A man named Jordan arrived that day. He had been part of a disinformation network, paid to inject fear, chaos, and doubt into any movement that threatened control. He had posted lies about the plateau, called it a cult, said people were being drugged, that hidden frequencies were altering behavior. But something in him wasn't settled. So he came, disguised, defensive, alone. He stood at the perimeter, waiting for a reason to walk away. But instead, he cried. Not because he was manipulated, not because he was told to, but because for the first time in his life, no one wanted anything from him. Aureon didn't ask for devotion, didn't ask for praise, didn't even look at him. And in that stillness, Jordan saw the spiral he had been spinning in for years. Fear, distrust, control, all built around a wound he'd never looked at. He sat, he stayed. And the next day, he began taking down his own lies, one post at a time. But elsewhere, another group formed. A splinter faction, born from fear, forged in secrecy. They called themselves the Shield. They believed Aureon was disarming humanity, making it vulnerable to a future invasion. They said the peace he offered was unnatural, even inhuman. They believed no being should hold such influence, especially one that refused to explain itself. And so, they planned. They infiltrated the outer circles of the gathering, never with violence, only with whispers. Isn't it strange he never speaks? What if he's feeding off our thoughts? What if this isn't awakening, but hypnosis? Some ignored them, some walked away. But a few listened. Fear, after all, is contagious, especially when it wears the mask of caution. Aureon remained still, but one of his orbolite beads, previously dormant, began to flicker. Not glow, not pulse, just flicker. Like a candle in a storm that hasn't arrived yet. Those closest to the platform noticed it first. Some felt it as a tightness in the chest, others as a ringing in the ears. One child said, "The gold is breathing faster." That night, a man from the Shield approached the platform. He carried nothing in his hands, only questions. He knelt, not out of reverence, but calculation. And he whispered, "If you're real, why don't you speak? Why don't you stop the ones twisting your message? Why do you allow the world to misunderstand you?" There was no answer, only stillness. The man stood. "Then you are not worthy of us." He turned and walked away. As he did, the flickering bead pulsed once, sharply, and every candle in the outer ring extinguished at once. No wind, no movement, just darkness. It returned moments later, but the message had landed. The spiral of fear had begun, and Aureon had seen it. Chapter 10. The Rain of Gold. The day after the candles went out, the world braced for something sharp. But what came was soft. It began at dawn. Clouds rolled in, not black and angry, but luminous, glowing faintly gold at their edges like halos stretched across the sky. They moved without wind, slow and silent, circling the plateau like great birds preparing to land. The people stirred. Some opened their eyes. Some whispered prayers. Some just watched, wide-eyed, still half-dreaming. Aureon had not moved, but his orbolite beads were humming now, almost imperceptibly. The sound wasn't audible, but it was felt, in the ribs, in the soles of the feet, in the marrow, like a memory returning from another lifetime. And then it began to rain. Not water, not fire, but light. Tiny flecks of radiant gold began to fall from the sky, like dust, but weightless. Each flake shimmered as it drifted, not in chaotic wind, but in graceful spirals, descending like soft blessings upon the heads of the people below. No one screamed, no one ran. Even the skeptics stood in silence, arms open. The golden rain was warm, like sunlight poured through water. It left no residue. It stung no eyes. But wherever it landed, something changed. A woman with arthritis felt the tension in her fingers soften. A man who had lost his hearing in one ear turned toward the sound of birdsong and began to cry. A child with eczema on her face ran to her mother beaming, her cheeks clear. But more than that, it healed something invisible. Two men who hadn't spoken in a decade reached for each other without words. A mother who'd blamed herself for years felt her chest loosen, her breath deepen. A soldier who'd spent his life waiting for enemies realized he had none left. Not in that moment. Not in the rain. The rain spread. What began above the plateau soon spilled outward, miles in all directions. Cameras captured it, satellites tracked it, and the world watched. In a drought-stricken region hundreds of miles away, the gold touched cracked earth. Within hours, the soil darkened. Within a day, sprouts emerged, unplanted, wild, alive. In rivers long polluted, the golden flecks floated briefly on the surface, then vanished. Toxicity levels dropped. Fish returned. In refugee camps, water tasted cleaner. In villages, livestock stopped limping. In cities, tension dropped like mist. No announcement, no signature, just grace. And still, Aureon did not speak. His eyes were half closed, his body still as stone. But his presence expanded, reaching far beyond the visible. Some said he had become the rain. Others said the rain was only his breath. But no one doubted any more that this was not magic. It was remembrance. A reporter in the crowd asked aloud, though not to Aureon, "Is this proof?" A boy beside her, no older than 10, replied without turning, "It's not proof. It's permission." She blinked. Permission for what? The boy looked up, his cheeks dusted with gold. To become who we really are. Elsewhere in the world, debates raged. Governments tried to frame the phenomenon as a natural anomaly. Agencies launched sample drones to collect the rain, only to find the particles vanished on contact with metal. A famous scientist went on air and said, "Whatever this is, it defies our known physics. But more than that, it defies our certainty." And maybe that's the point. The shield, the splinter group born from fear, went quiet. Not disbanded, but unsettled. Their leader, known only as Cain, watched the rain fall from afar. He didn't kneel, he didn't speak, but he opened his hand and let a single golden flake land in his palm. It didn't burn. It didn't vanish. It just shimmered, and something in him began to uncoil. At the plateau, a new stillness took root. Not the tense silence of confusion, but the deep quiet of knowing. It wasn't over. Not yet. But something had softened. The world had tasted grace, and that taste would linger. That night, as the last flakes drifted gently to earth, the sky cleared. The stars above the platform shone with unnatural clarity, like diamond dust spilled across velvet, and the moon turned gold, just for a moment. Aureon opened his eyes fully. The beads around his neck glowed, all of them now, in perfect harmony, forming a gentle orbit of light. And though he still did not speak, a message entered the hearts of all who were watching. This is not a gift. It is a reflection. You have done this to yourselves. I am only the reminder. Chapter 11. The Choice. The rain had passed, but its echo remained in the soil, in the skin, in the soul. Even days later, the golden shimmer lingered in the air, barely visible like the memory of a melody. The world was quieter now, not silent, not numb, attentive. People spoke less, but when they did, they meant it. They looked each other in the eyes again. They held their words like sacred offerings, meant to heal, not wound. And still, Aureon sat unmoving, hovering, anchored in light. But the feeling around him had changed. It was no longer awe. It was no longer confusion. It was readiness. On the 25th day, the sky darkened, not with storm, but with significance. Aurion's beads began to rise, one by one, orbiting slowly around him like planets in miniature. Each glowed with a different hue: gold, silver, violet, teal, rose. And in the minds of all who watched, a new vision unfolded. The final vision. Two Earths. They saw the world split, not physically, not in violence, but as a choice. In one version, life returned to old rhythms, screens buzzing, cities choking, people turning on one another for power, for status, for pain made profitable. The silence of Aureon became a myth, his teachings twisted, sold, weaponized. This earth forgot him, not all at once, but slowly, willfully, as comfort overtook courage. And though technology advanced and empires rose, the soul of the world dimmed. In the other earth, something else happened. People didn't become saints. They didn't become perfect. They became present. Conflict still arose, but it was met with curiosity, not condemnation. Differences were no longer threats, but invitations. Power was redefined, not as control, but as compassion in action. Children were taught to feel before they spoke. Elders were asked to share stories, not just symptoms. Work became meaningful. Rest became holy. The planet healed, not because of magic, but because the people chose to become mirrors of truth. This earth remembered. The vision ended. No threats, no countdowns, no savior. Just two paths, two frequencies, two futures, and the simple, silent understanding that we must choose. Around the world, that choice began to ripple. In some cities, entire neighborhoods began to self-organize, creating community gardens, sharing food, teaching children together in the open air. In other places, panic rose again. Markets dipped, pundits screamed, old systems clenched. And yet, something held. The spiral of fear, once inevitable, now met resistance. Not through violence, but awareness. More and more people were not buying back in. They had seen too much, felt too much, become too much. To go back now would be a kind of death. At the plateau, a girl stood. It was Amira. She had returned with her parents after weeks of rest. She walked alone to the platform. No one stopped her. Aureon's eyes opened. His orbiting beads paused. Amira placed a small flower at the base of the golden column. It was yellow, wild, and perfect. "Thank you for showing us what we already knew," she whispered. And then, from deep within the earth beneath them, a resonance rose. Not sound, not earthquake, but agreement, as if the earth itself had heard her. Aureon looked upward. The clouds parted. The luminarch appeared again, golden, vast, radiant, not descending, just present, waiting. Aureon's beads slowly returned to his neck. One by one, they dimmed. One by one, they stilled. Then he stood. He had not moved in nearly a month, but he rose with no effort. Like time itself had offered him permission. His feet never touched the platform. He hovered just above it, still robed, still golden, still silent. And yet, the world heard him. "You are free now," came the feeling in every heart. "Not because I made you so, but because you remembered." He raised one hand, not in farewell, not in command, but in blessing. A soft, golden ripple moved through the crowd, through the sky, through the soil. And in that moment, every tree on earth grew one new leaf. Every sleeping child stirred gently. Every sleeping soul began to wake. He turned, faced the rising luminarch, and the orb began to reform. Liquid gold rose from the column, enveloping him slowly. Not like a prison, like a womb. The sphere sealed around him, shimmering, rippling like it had on the first day. But this time, it carried something new. Understanding. The orb rose. The crowd stepped back, eyes lifted, hearts open. It hovered above them, radiant and soundless. Then, with impossible grace, it ascended, rising past cloud and storm, into atmosphere, into stars. The luminarch received it. And then, like breath returning to silence, it vanished. Aureon was gone, but the silence he left behind was alive. Chapter 12. The Departure. The sky was empty again, but nothing felt missing. The golden orb had risen. The luminarch had received him, and the stars now carried his stillness into eternity. But the earth remained full. People lingered at the plateau, not out of need, not in mourning, but in gratitude. No monuments were built, no shrines, no doctrines declared. Just a field of flattened grass, footprints in spirals, and a silence that sang. And something else. At the center of where the platform had hovered, just above the soft earth, rested a single strand of beads. They weren't glowing. They didn't float. They simply lay there, gently humming, as if alive in memory. People gathered near, but no one touched them. Some believed they were sacred. Others believed they were meant to stay untouched forever. But one person stepped forward. A child. Not Amira, not Noor. A boy this time. Perhaps 6 years old. He said nothing. He simply walked, calm and barefoot, through the quiet crowd. He knelt beside the beads, looked at them, then placed his hand on his chest and picked them up. The beads didn't glow, but something moved in the wind, something that hadn't stirred in days. A breeze, soft and fragrant, carrying the scent of rain and firewood and something older than language. The boy turned, looked out at the people, and smiled. Not because he understood everything, but because he remembered enough. Then he walked back to his family, beads in hand, like a thread waiting to be woven again. The crowd did not erupt. No cheering, no clapping, only stillness, tears, soft laughter, and the sound of breath shared across nations. Across the world, the changes had already begun. In classrooms, children were being taught to sit in silence each morning, not as punishment, but as practice. In hospitals, laughter therapy and music returned to the sterile halls. Farmers sowed crops by moonlight, not deadlines. Offices became circles. Screens were turned off at dinner. Strangers greeted each other with eyes, not just words. Not everywhere, not instantly, but enough. The golden moment had taken root. Some still resisted, some still raged, some still sold fear. But their voices no longer echoed like they used to, because something deeper now held the collective ear, and it sounded like silence. In space there was no trace of the luminarch, no signal, no flare. But astronomers in Chile and South Africa recorded a strange pattern of gold-shifted light across several deep space sectors, brief flashes forming a spiral before vanishing into blackness. It was later nicknamed the Aureon curve. No one could explain it. But many began to dream again. The United Nations did not issue a formal statement, but a message was read on the floor by an elder delegate from Bhutan. He came with no flag. He left with no name, and in between, he gave us back what we never lost: ourselves. On the plateau, the field grew wild again. The soil, enriched by the golden rain, bloomed faster than it should have. Flowers never seen before began to grow, strange, luminous blossoms with soft petals that shifted hue in sunlight. Bees returned. So did songbirds. No one fenced the land. It became a sanctuary, not of worship, of remembrance. The beads, they were never placed in a museum. The boy who picked them up grew older. He never became famous, never claimed to be chosen. But people said there was something in his eyes, a kind of stillness that made you want to tell the truth. He lived a quiet life, and that was enough. In time, many forgot the finer details. Dates blurred, recordings degraded, stories fractured. But the feeling remained, like the scent of a fire long burned out, still held in the cloth of your shirt, like a melody you only hear in dreams, like the echo of gold in your chest when someone sees who you really are and doesn't look away. No monument was needed, because the whole world had become a living altar. And Aurion's message remained, not carved in stone, but carried in the breath of every awakening heart. Final line. He left not to lead us, but to remind us we were never alone. The end.